Welcome back to another explainer. Look, I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are going to do something pretty cool. We're going to make the invisible, highly engineered global food network completely visible. If you've ever stopped in the middle of a grocery store aisle and just wondered how on earth all this fresh food miraculously arrived there from across the planet, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're mapping out global agricultural supply chains and diving into the massive world of agribusiness.
All right, to kick things off, I want you to picture a simple, everyday banana. It's just sitting there, perfectly yellow on the supermarket shelf. But you know, it didn't just grow on a tree out back and magically appear there this morning. To get to your hand, that single piece of fruit embarked on a massive, highly coordinated international journey lasting 10 to 14 days. We're talking dozens of specialized organizations, crossing borders, crossing oceans. How is that level of coordination even possible on a daily basis? Well, to understand that banana's journey, we really have to look at the corporate structures operating behind the scenes.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the modern agribusiness machine.
So, what are we actually talking about here? The term is agribusiness. And hey, this isn't just about a farmer plowing a field. Agribusiness is the entire cluster of industries and firms involved in producing, processing, distributing, and retailing agricultural commodities. It's the whole shebang. It encompasses the chemical companies that supply the seeds and fertilizer, the logistics companies handling the refrigerated shipping, the processors, the food manufacturers, and of course, the giant retail chains. It is a highly industrialized, globally integrated system. And what's really vital to understand is that ownership within this system is heavily concentrated in the hands of just a few powerful corporations.
Now, there are basically two distinct strategies these corporations use to consolidate all that power. First up, there's vertical integration. Think of a company like Cargill. They don't just buy crops. No, they sell the farmer the fertilizer, they buy and store the grain, they transport it on their own ships, and they process it in their own mills. They literally control successive stages of the commodity chain, from farm to fork. Then, on the flip side, we have horizontal acquisition. This is when a company simply buys up its direct competitors to dominate a single stage of the chain. A textbook example here is Monsanto, which spent 20 years buying up hundreds of smaller competing seed companies to build an immense market share.
And you can see the visual result of that horizontal consolidation right here. It's honestly staggering. Decades ago, you had hundreds of independent companies serving farmers, but after waves of mergers and acquisitions, just four massive conglomerates, Bayer Monsanto, Corteva Pioneer, ChemChina Syngenta, and BASF, came to control roughly 60% of the entire commercial seed market by 2020. That is an incredible amount of power concentrated at the very starting line of the global food supply. So we know who is running the system. Let's actually trace how the system moves food across the globe.
Moving on to Section 2. Let's trace the commodity chain.
Think of a commodity chain like a giant map that traces the sequence of activities transforming a raw product into a consumer good. We can trace a bunch of bananas from a plantation in Honduras all the way to a consumer in Wisconsin. Step 1 is planting on pesticide-managed land. Step 2 is harvesting. And here is a fascinating little detail. The bananas are actually cut by hand at only 75 to 80% maturity. If they were fully yellow, there's no way they'd survive the trip without bruising. Step 3 is a 5 to 10-day ocean transit in refrigerated containers. Step 4, they arrive at ports and go into specialized ripening rooms. Here, they are hit with ethylene gas, which is a natural plant hormone to trigger uniform yellowing. Finally, Step 5, they hit the retail shelves in Wisconsin with just a tiny 3 to 7 day window before going bad. It is basically a highly orchestrated ballet of logistics.
Now check out the economics of that journey, because it's pretty wild. The value of an 18-kilogram box of bananas right at the farm gate in Honduras is about $3.50. But the retail price of that exact same box in Wisconsin, $12 to $14. The farm worker who physically harvested those bananas might make roughly 1 to 2 cents per pound sold. The shocking disparity here really shows us that the vast majority of the profit is not captured by the farmers, but by the logistics, processing, and retail corporations headquartered in wealthy countries. But making that massive geographic jump from Honduras to Wisconsin requires a technological miracle.
Which brings us to Section 3, the cold chain revolution. You see, this entire global system absolutely relies on just-in-time logistics and what's known as the cold chain. The cold chain is the continuous temperature-controlled segment of the food supply chain. It's designed to preserve perishables from the exact moment they are harvested right up to consumption. We're talking refrigerated farm storage, specialized ocean containers, temperature-controlled trucks, and retail display cases.
This exact invisible infrastructure is literally the only reason a consumer in the US can eat fresh Chilean blueberries in February or fresh Mexican strawberries in the dead of winter.
And the history of how this became economically viable happened incredibly fast. Back in 1950, global freight costs were just prohibitively high for cheap perishables. But then, in 1956, an American trucking entrepreneur named Malcolm McLean launched the first standardized container service. These standardized boxes could be loaded with refrigeration units and moved seamlessly from a ship to a train to a truck without ever being unpacked. It was a real game changer. By the year 2000, this single innovation caused freight costs to drop by a staggering 90%. That drop effectively made it possible to source food from anywhere on the planet. All right, let's pan out a bit and look at the macroeconomic scale.
Section 4. The cash crop paradox. What happens when entire nations rely on these global supply chains?
Many countries, particularly in the Global South, had their agriculture organized around single export commodities during the colonial era, and that specialization largely persists today. This leads to what we call cash crop dependence. Relying on just one or two export commodities leaves a nation's economy dangerously exposed. To put that into perspective, if you are a country like Ethiopia, generating 60% of your total export earnings from coffee, or Ivory Coast relying on cocoa for 40%, a single severe drought or a sudden drop in global prices can be absolutely devastating to the entire economy.
It creates a profound paradox for these nations, where they have to balance structural risks against very vital rewards. The risks are clear: intense price volatility, the looming threat of lab-made synthetics replacing the crop, and sudden weather shocks. But we've also got to objectively look at the rewards. In many places, cash crop agriculture has been the primary vehicle for rural income growth. Kenyan smallholder farmers, Colombian coffee cooperatives, and Vietnamese rice growers have successfully used export earnings to directly fund education, healthcare, and vital rural business investments. The relationship is complex, and it's deeply dependent on the specific context of the region. Let's see how this builds into the real world.
Section 5. Hidden costs of global food.
Because when we buy food imported from thousands of miles away, there are always invisible, localized impacts at the source. We can see this super clearly in two powerful geographic case studies outlined in our source material: the Mexican avocado boom in Michoacan and the Tanzanian coffee crisis near Kilimanjaro. Let's break these down.
Triggered by the 1994 NAFTA agreement, the western state of Michoacan now produces roughly 80% of the avocados consumed in the U.S. The economic boom there has certainly raised local incomes, transforming the region into 200,000 hectares of orchards. However, this has come with severe environmental and social costs. The intense irrigation required has led to measurable aquifer depletion. Furthermore, the immense profits have unfortunately attracted organized crime. Cartels like the Knights Templar and the CJNG have subjected avocado farmers and packers to structured extortion, charging heavy taxes per truckload. It really shows how global food systems operate within local realities that are largely invisible to the end consumer.
Then turning to the Tanzanian coffee crisis. Arabica coffee is quite fragile. It requires a very narrow temperature range of 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. As global average temperatures rise, the optimal growing zone is actually moving physically up the mountainside. In the Kilimanjaro region, this altitude is rising by an estimated 160 meters every single decade. For the local farmers, this global climate shift forces very real local consequences. They are having to renegotiate land access higher up the mountain, abandon their lower elevation farms, and face increased geographic concentration as the viable farming zones continue to shrink. The crucial point here is summarized perfectly by this one concept: production in the periphery, profit capture in the core. Whether it's an avocado from Michoacan, a banana from Honduras, or coffee from Tanzania, tracing a commodity chain reveals the exact same spatial pattern. The physical production and all the environmental and social costs associated with it happen out in the peripheral developing regions. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the financial profit is captured by corporate logistics and retailers located in the wealthy core regions.
So this spatial relationship connects distant producers and distant consumers in profound ways that neither usually recognizes. And I'll leave you with this thought to consider. Next time you're walking through the grocery store, holding a perfectly ripe banana or a fresh avocado in the dead of winter, ask yourself, what invisible world did this food build, and who really paid the price to get it into your hands? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I will see you next time.